Today we'll talk about how fleeting and changeable the fashion of the 19th century was, when the styles of women's dresses, without lingering for a long time, quickly replaced each other, and also about how Russian fashionable girls dressed at that time.
Women's fashion at the beginning of the century wasn't distinguished by the complexity of dress styles. The neoclassicism prevailing at that time in all art, with its naturalness and completeness in Russian fashion, was called Empire style. Empire style fashion at the beginning of the 19th century was most widespread in France and in the Russian Empire. The empire-style costume, like art, was based on Roman traditions. Especially the Roman influence on the empire-style costume was noticeable in women's dress.
An empire-style dress is a long white dress with short spherical sleeves that emphasize the shoulders and with an inflated waistline, very often highlighted by a belt. A white dress made of light fabric, often silk, in the empire style according to the latest fashion of the time, was often worn wet so that the fabric would fit the figure and thus the female figure resembled the white marble columns of ancient temples. In a cold climate, such fashion contributed to the appearance of the most real victims of fashion. In winter Petersburg, young ladies caught pneumonia, from which in those days it was easy to die.
But already in the 1810s, empire-style dresses gradually adapted to the European climate. So dresses begin to be sewn from denser and more expensive fabrics, for example brocade or velvet. Dresses are no longer exclusively white, however they are still mostly plain. Dresses are also decorated with embroidery. There are also variants of dresses with long sleeves. In the 1810s, empire-style dresses were deprived of trains and their skirt acquired a bell-shaped, narrow shape.
As for men, at the beginning of the 19th century, stockings and short culottes were replaced by long trousers and pantaloons, ankle length. Such trousers are most often worn with suspenders. Men also wear a white shirt with a starched stand-up collar, a colorful vest, and a frock coat. The coat is double-breasted, side-length, with a high collar. Later the coat is replaced by a tailcoat. The tailcoat in the 19th century was everyday clothing. It could be of various colors. The tailcoat was most often worn with light pantaloons and a less lightened color than the tailcoat. On the neck of men of the beginning of the 19th century, they wore a prototype of a tie, neck scarves, which could be tucked behind the vest or tied in various ways, for example with knot or a bow.
Empire style didn't last long, but the fashion for femininity and sophistication hasn't disappeared. In the 30s, his style was replaced by Romanticism, so if even in the first decades of the 19th century women wore simple short-cut dresses with lengthened sleeves, then in the 1830s corsets and richly decorated dresses with full skirts were back in fashion. Another feature of romantic dresses is that the sleeves and skirts of these dresses take the shape of a bell. The colors of the dresses are different. Plaid dresses are becoming fashionable. Shawls and scarves are worn with dresses. For example, a sharp scarf which falls on the waist from behind, after which it is thrown from the front to the arms bent at the elbows.
There is a fashion for hats. In the period of Romanticism, the most popular hat is a bonnet, a headdress with a high crown. for the hair removed on the back of the head, and with wide rigid brims framing the face, tapering to the back of the head. The bonnet was held on the head by white ribbons, which were tied under the chin with a bow.
As for the men's costume, it was not subject to such significant changes as the women's costume. Men still wear light trousers, pantaloons, and vest, tailcoat or coat of darker shades on top. One of the most popular was a carry coat, a coat with several colors.
One of the most magnificent and striking in the history of fashion, of course, was the Rococo style of the 18th century. The style of the second Rococo falls on the period of the small crinoline and the heyday of the second Rococo. To go out, women had to wear underwear, a long white short and pantaloons as well as stockings. Then the corset was tightened. As in the Rococo period of the 18th century, a thin waist is in fashion. Whalebone served as material for the corset. Next, the frame was put on. In the middle of the 19th century, the frame was improved. It consists of elastic steel hoops. Such a frame has come into use since 1859. Prior to this, women simply wore several petticoats, up to 6 on average. At the same time, the very first skirt was knee-length. Horsehair was used in its tail horn, hence the name of the frame for skirts, crinoline. Light shades are almost gone. Ladies' monochromatic outfits are sewn mainly from dark-colored fabric, use striped checked matter. With the advent of dyes, saturated red, purple, fuchsia become fashionable.
In the 1870s and 1880s, Positivism was in vogue. The style of Positivism in European art of the second half of the 19th century extended only to decorative and applied arts. It all started with crinolines, frames for skirts of dresses in the style of the second Rococo. The frames were so high that women couldn't walk normally, since they simply didn't see where they were going because of the splendor of the skirts. And the skirts began to gradually narrow in front, while the entire structure of the frame shifted back.
Then small bustles appeared, wire frames or cotton pads, which are fixed under the dress below the waist. All these observations were obtained in order to obtain the volume and splendor of the skirt in the buttocks. Gradually, the skirts in front are narrowing more and more. The frame structure is folded back. The silhouette of women's dresses has become similar to the Latin letter S. S-shaped dresses ultimately have the superiority of the positivism style in women's costume.
Like all styles of the 19th century, Positivism was most evident in women's clothing, while the men's suit remained virtually unchanged. In the men's fashion of the second half of the 19th century, a three-piece suit was finally established: trousers, a vest, and a jacket. After 1875, frock coats and tailcoats are practically not worn as everyday clothes. Multicolored tailcoats are no longer found. Now the tailcoat is evening wear in black.
In the early 90s of the 19th century, a new style arose, modern. In the early 90s, the skirt beautifully fitting the hips, falls to the floor and looks like a bell. The entire female figure acquires harmony and rushes up. Natural proportions prevail. The silhouette reveals all the advantages of the female figure. The congestion of the dress with small details and decorations disappears. The colors become not so bright. Women completely refuse corsets and crinolines. The outfits are complemented with fur capes and shawls. By the end of the century, the mutton-style sleeve was back in fashion, expanding in the shoulder area in the form of the volumetric assembly of fabric and tapering at the elbow.
In a relatively short period of time, fashion and style in women's clothing changed radically. It became more complicated from a light empire style to a rococo style, then gradually returned to practically again. Many elements in clothing can be seen in modern clothing, especially in the design and on the catwalks. Women's clothing of this time can hardly be called comfortable. Beautiful, yes. Hems of long dresses dragging along the ground, numerous petticoats, heavy jewelry, frills, ribbons, and that's not to mention the tight corsets that were tightened so tight that it was difficult to breathe, and crinolines made of steel hoops. Sometimes such outfit weighed 10-15 kilograms.
Here you can see the resources used.
Now you need answer some following questions. Do you mind telling me which style did you like the most? Could you tell me what did the name crinoline come from? The fashion in the 19th century was very uncomfortable, wasn't it? Young ladies in the 19th century wanting to follow the trends fell ill with pneumonia and even died, didn't they?
Thank you all for your attention.